Well, we're going to get started early here today because we have a lot to cover. So, welcome to Playbooks. My name is Sarita Dua. I am based in Portland, Oregon, and I normally have Vija Williams as my co-host, but in an interesting twist of events, she is one of our panelists, our esteemed panelists. We've got Vija Williams, Brian Gubernick, and Spring Bengtzen today, and we are going to talk about an amazing activity that happened this last weekend. And it didn't happen just last weekend, it happened for months and weeks before. And the event is called 29029, which is the number of feet of Mount Everest. So these folks and many others went out to Whistler Mountain and climbed the mountain, 8 different ascents to hike the equivalent of Mount Everest. And you may be wondering, and we've said this in our promo, what does this have to do with business? What does this have to do with life? And the one word answer is everything. So excited to interview my friends and get their perspective on taking this challenge on and the lessons they've learned and how they've changed through the process. So with that, let's start with you, Via, since everyone's used to seeing you every other Wednesday here on Power Playbooks. Introduce yourself from a different perspective, from how how did this challenge come about for you? And just kind of give us your perspective on going into this, why you wanted to do this, what was your level of fitness, and kind of give us that start. I want to hear everyone's kind of starting trajectory, and then we're going to get into a lot of questions. That being said, please post questions in the chat. We're monitoring chat, and we'll make sure we get as many answered as we can. And with that, Via, I'm going to turn it to you.
Well, thank you. And it does really feel weird to be on this side of the interview. I'm not going to lie, but for you guys who have been with me for a long time, I've been doing webinars for a long time, and I looked different a few years ago. We'll just probably leave it at that. So I have gone through a massive health focus and transformation over the last, not even 2 years, really. Well, I'll call it 2 years. And so I honestly did this event because Spring invited me and encouraged me and challenged me to do it. And I said no. I was like, I'm not ready. I haven't even started working out yet. Yes, I want to do the New York Marathon this year because that's a redemption race. I didn't finish it in 2022, but I am nowhere near ready for 29029 because that's actually harder than the New York Marathon. So I said no. And she luckily said, I don't believe you. I think you are ready for this and that you should consider doing it. So I did it kind of on an impulse. I said yes fast and just committed to it because I'd seen the videos before. It definitely, I knew it was up my alley, but I really didn't feel ready for it. So when they say like couch to marathon or couch to 5K or whatever, I was literally couch to 29029. I mean, Spring and Brian, you guys did Pistawa with me. I could barely make it up there without resting. I remember I had to rest. That was what, a mile ascent, a mile and a half. And I started, my very first hike was on Mother's Day weekend. So when was that, in May? And that's not that long ago. And so I followed that training plan pretty closely because even on the training plan, I was substituting runs for hikes. Doesn't matter. So I would say it took me 4.5, whatever the training. When did that training plan start? 4 months, 5 months?
Yeah, it was like I think it's a 20-week plan or is what they send out.
So 20 weeks, I followed that plan. I was at baseline zero. And by the end of it, my weekend workouts were on tier 4 of the plan. My weekday weekouts tended to stay like tier 1 of the plan. So it happened really fast. It's pretty amazing actually how fast that you can do it. So that's what happened.
You were pretty committed though. Like, I think that you were really committed. Like once, if you're okay with me sharing this, so you committed and then I don't think you mentally had committed, until Brian called you out and Brian called you and said, hey, I know you've committed, but you haven't publicly declared what reason and what are you doing? And that alone was like, okay, I'm going to put it out. Then you put it out there and then something like triggered that you're like, I'm all in, let's go.
Brian called me, and Brian, you were right. You did call that, I have to say, because he said, I've noticed you've been really quiet about this. And you're not like that. Like you like external motivation. And which is true. And he called and I remember it because I was at the sidelines of Zoe's soccer game and she was on the bench. Normally I wouldn't answer the phone but she wasn't playing. And so I answered it and I'm like, is everything okay? Why would Brian be calling me on a Sunday? And he was like, you can't just show up to the mountain on this one, Via. Like you've got to do the work. And I think that you haven't announced it publicly. And I think you need to do that to do the work. Think you need that accountability to do it. And I was like, no, I don't want to. I just want this to be quiet work. I want this to be, which is ironic.
Well, that way, if I don't succeed, no one knows about it, right?
Yeah.
So
He called me out.
Yeah, I wrote in chat, you can say yes, but you really have to say yes. And I think what I'm hearing with friends like Spring and Brian, Spring, who kind of didn't take no for an answer, and then Brian saying, Via, you can't wing it. You're going to do this. And you
announce it. So announce it publicly. And you're both right. Spring, Brian, you're both right. Yeah.
I'll tell you my observation. I know we're all observing Via now.
I know, it's like hot seat Via.
But it was Via. You and I texted about this, and you corrected me. You had a different, like I had a guess, and then you corrected me and told me this. So I said, I think Via's training really yes, the public commitment mattered, but I said to her, we were away, we were doing an event together in DC, and she had a workout in DC, and I remember her texting me after the workout, and she was like ecstatic or excited about the success she had on this workout. It caught her by surprise. And I think, and I had texted Via, I think it all changed for you the day you had that run in Washington, DC. And it was like a turning point because you're like, you saw, maybe I can do this. And you corrected me and said you had that feeling, but it was on the mountain. It wasn't in DC. But that was an interesting observation to know that she was kind of lacked confidence and then had this workout that showed like a light. Like, wait, holy cow, maybe this is something I can not just show up for, but be successful in doing. It's kind of cool to see.
Well, I will just say to that, then we'll move on. But I will just say to that, Brian texted me at one point, and I think that I think we're talking about the same time frame, actually. Mm-hmm. But Brian texted me at one point, and I go, well, I did this one hike, and he goes, all right, here's your next assignment. I don't care what the training plan says. I think it's time for you to go do a hike that scares you. And I was like, okay. So I literally picked one that, scary meaning a big ascent. And I remember doing it. That was what I felt like was my turning point. I was like, oh my gosh, I'm good. Like, this is good. I'm good. Like, I'm good at this. Like, this is my thing. And so it might've happened right around the same time, but I do remember consciously going, wow, this is awesome.
So in contrast to Via doing her first 29029, Brian and Spring, tell us about your 29029 journeys. I know it wasn't your first one. Tell us about this one and just a little bit about your experience with this challenge in general.
You want to go first, Brian?
Go ahead, Spring. Go ahead.
Okay. Well, so a little bit of how I ended up here, and I think this is important for all of you, is I heard somebody speak a few years ago, and he said, what makes people interesting is the stories that they tell. And in order to have new stories, you have to put yourself in new environments. And he said, I find myself on the same beach vacation, just at a different beach. And it hit me, and I was like, oh my gosh, that's my life. Like, I'm doing the same things over and over and over again, which is kind of funny because I've done 29 so many times now. But I'm doing the same thing. I need some new experiences. And I followed a few influencers that did 29029, and I saw the tents at Snow Basin because I ride my bike there. So I signed up for the challenge the first time of just simply like Via. I didn't have weight to lose, but I was like, I want to put myself in a new environment and give myself a challenge. I felt so purposeful training for it. Like the time on the mountain, Brian and I talked about this. We hiked a few times. The time on the mountain where you can just quiet your brain and think, and then just being so purposeful with that and having a goal. I loved my first experience, and it was hard and gritty that I'm like, oh, I want to do it again. So I did several last year, and then I signed up for a couple this year to do it with my friends. I would say the difference from the first to the last is I always knew I was going to finish outside of any injury. So that's not really the difference, but each time you get a little bit of insight from the mountain. And I would say this particular one for me was just recognizing how much community and who you surround yourself with matters even more and more and more. Like, Brian and I did some laps together, and I actually wrote about this. Brian, you're probably not on my email list, but it's my email that went out today about like who you surround yourself with. Like Brian and I were going to go one more lap, and it was like 12 o'clock at night. And I got in the gondola with this dude that he and I ended up convincing each other we shouldn't go for one more lap. And it was just the power of who you surround yourself with. And there were so many people on that mountain that I think that mentally have the fortitude, but a lot of people let them, didn't necessarily push them or let them go or like hold them to what they said they wanted to. And I just think who you put yourself around is going to ultimately determine a lot of your success. Like with Vija, I had no doubt she was going to finish this because I wasn't going to let her not finish. If I had to freaking go every single lap with her, like there was just no doubt, right? But if you surround yourself with people that will let you bail out or have excuses, and partially sometimes that's what happens. So that was a little bit my insight from this particular mountain, but I guess I need to do some new adventures. So we'll talk about that later.
It might be your new beach that you do over and over, and you got to do another one.
Yeah, exactly.
Tell us from your perspective what this particular challenge meant, and how you've gotten into this, and what's next for you with regards to challenging yourself.
Yeah, I have been doing something endurance related for a while now, marathons or triathlons or whatever. And the truth of the matter is I don't necessarily love that stuff. I love the preparation and the training and the mission and the goal. Like, I don't necessarily need the motivation, but I like the organization to it. Like I'll work out. I'm sure many watching here, you work out because you want greater health and you want longer health span and all of that. But I wanted a more detailed goal in front of me. And so I signed up for a lot of things. And in my particular case, as it pertains to 29029, it was the old RAS that got going for me in 2021, where everywhere I seemed to turn, I kept hearing about this Misogi idea. Jesse Itzler talks about Misogi. And then you start reading a book like Comfort Crisis by Michael Easter. He talks about Misogi. And then I talk to Spring, and she's like, I'm going to do something massive this year. And the idea of Misogi is simply, almost this spiritual experience that you'll get through doing some sort of challenging adventure. And in my world, it would be something endurance related. And so, and Michael Easter's rules on Misogi is you got to have a chance at failing and you can't die. Those are the two rules. It's got to have a potential failure, like where you're not going to succeed, and you got to make sure you stay alive. And so when I was seeing all this stuff everywhere, and then we had Colin O'Brady come speak at an event early on, shortly after I read his one of his books. And I heard about this 29029 thing. Spring was really on the early side of this. I hadn't heard about it yet. And that was it. I was like, that sounds like a great challenge. Let's go do it. For me, these endurance events, and specifically the 29029, I'll sound like a masochist, and I hope it doesn't come across that way. But there's this, and Vija I'm sure we'll share this in Spring. I know we talked about it. There's just this experience or this feeling that you get or this amount of learning that you get about yourself when you are staring massive adversity in the face, like when it's just you versus you in your head. And in a very sick and twisted way, I think, actually, I'd include you in this, Sarita, because we've done some endurance stuff together. I think that we crave it to some degree. We're scared of it. We know it's going to suck, but we also want to see, like, can I persevere? Like, do I have what it takes? And so it becomes, actually, ironically, this morning I saw something by J.J. Watt, who is a former all-pro football player. And he had mentioned about how he got through hard times. It became a competition of him versus adversity. And that's exactly the way I feel. Like, I had said to my wife and those close to me before we left for this event, man, I can't wait until it's pouring rain, pitch black, and I'm all by myself. And again, I know a lot of people are like, that is messed up.
That is messed up.
There is just a feeling, there's just an experience that you get when you're pushing yourself to that level, knowing that you're on the verge of saying, what the hell am I doing? This is the worst decision ever. I should potentially stop. You learn a lot. And so I seek those moments. I know this is going to seem like a crazy analogy, but when I think about my kids when they were super little, like infants, and at 3 a.m., you got to get up yet again to pace around the house. You don't really get that opportunity very often in life or ever again. Like, sure, maybe one day with grandkids and things like that. Like, there are just some things you just don't get to do that often. Yet you, as much as it sucks, you savor the experience. I look at the adversity that you get in these events as something similar to that. You learn a lot. And so I wouldn't say I'm addicted to that sort of thing, but I'm certainly drawn to it. And I think these ladies know the feeling I'm talking about.
Well, I see that in common with you guys. You guys are goal setters and then goal getters. And it seems like you always have a big goal or something that you're chasing, and that's a part of your DNA. I don't know if that's me overstating just from the outside looking in, but I know you all fairly closely, and there's always something, right? And it's usually pushing yourself beyond any limit that you thought you could do. So talk about that. I mean, how did that play into, for Spring and Brian, maybe just not this one because it wasn't your first one, but what kind of sacrifices did you have to make in your personal life and in your schedule to prepare for this? And then I do want to get pretty quickly until I want to talk about race day because I know it wasn't pleasant. But before we get there, just leading up, how did you actually prepare not only yourself, but the people in your life to understand because they were taking it on with you? I don't know who wants to go first, but let's talk about that.
Well, I wouldn't mind jumping in because I just want to I want to echo something Brian said and maybe finish that thought, and then I'm happy to answer that. And that is that I did this, and I think, Brian, how I worded what you were saying, because it's just really important. It's an important point. Like, I wanted to meet this new version of myself. I wanted to see. Spring and I did some Misogi last year in Costa Rica. And I loved how I showed up. Like it kind of made my year, and I leaned on that a lot. I was like, I showed up awesomely to a really tough Misogi. And I think I think that's what I was seeking here. I was like, I want to keep meeting this new version of myself and testing almost, and that might sound warped, but testing how am I going to show up? And just to finish that thought, I just posted this video. I'm posting all of my video diaries that I did. And I took the wording. Eric Heinen wrote a really good recap of 29. So I took his wording, and in one of the words the phrases said, you want to quit all the time. And I have to tell you guys, I never once wanted to quit. It actually didn't even, I had that moment maybe once on my 8th lap, and I knew I wouldn't, but I actually never did, because I was like, bring it on. Like, anytime the pain cave came, I was like, this is why I'm here. Brian, to your point, like about being in the dark and the rain, I'm like, my pain management, I pre-planned how I was going to handle any adversity. And And the pride that you feel when you show up strong to that adversity and you're working your plan and you expect the massive amount of pain and suffering and you show up to face it like a warrior and you keep going and you finish. Like I didn't really ever want to quit, you guys. Like I honestly, I mean, it might sound crazy, but it didn't, I wasn't there to quit. Like it really didn't. The only time it crossed my mind, ironically, was on the last lap where I was just spent. But I will just say one thing, because I know that Spring's got a similar, I think that Spring and her son had some experiences similar to me, but I remember Ben Kinney taught kind of is the brainchild of this one. He taught me years ago that it's really great when you can group your goals. So an example would be if you're doing training, can you also, and you have family time as a goal or one-on-one kid time as a goal, can you combine those two things? Do you have a book goal for the year? Can you listen to a book and on Audible while you're doing it? So I've had for a long time this mindset of if I'm going to do one thing, can I maybe add another value and, add something in that I've been trying to achieve into that thing? So this training takes an immense amount of sacrifice because of the sheer number of hours involved. And I mean, by the end there, we're at 8 to 12 hour hikes. These are full days, affects your evening plans. Frankly, it affects your plans the night before, because I'm not going to go drinking with the ladies before a 12-hour, 16-mile, 8K elevation hike. It's just not going to happen. So in my case, what I did is I invited my oldest son, who was home for the summer, who I hadn't got to spend a lot of time with the last few years. I said, hey, I was wondering if you would be interested in doing this with me this summer. And, this is going to kind of take up your weekends, but I would really welcome spending time with you and doing this. And he ended up doing almost every single long hike with me. Aiden, my second son, joined me a little bit. And I cannot express, if anything makes me cry, it'll be that. Because at the time you have with your kids like that in nature, I didn't have one AirPod on the entire training because I was with Michael or Aiden pretty much. And there's something that happens when you're not staring at each other, when you're walking side by side in the trees in nature, you talk differently. Sometimes it's really shallow things and really funny things. Sometimes it's really deep future stuff. So it took a lot of time, Sarita, and a lot of sacrifice, and I wouldn't have traded a minute of it.
It's amazing. I love that in terms of how you have it stacked with a goal stacked where you train for a mountain climb and you spent key time with your family. Anything else you want to add on that, Brian, Spring? Just in terms of preparation, time.
I mean, I would say with anything that you want in life, I'm just not a huge believer of balance. I think sometimes there's sacrifice. So like for me, I was fortunate to train with my son as well some of the time, but I think my family just knew I had a goal. So I would go out every weekend on Saturday and Sunday mornings and then be done by like 1 or 2. But there is a sacrifice that comes into anything that you want. I had the opportunity, the first event that I did, 29 used to be owned by iFit. And iFit did a summit push where they let you go climb Snow Basin for 1 day. And so I got an idea of like what I was up for. This was like in May, and the 29 was in August. And that 1 day made me like, oh my gosh, I have got to train. Like this is going to be incredibly painful. And so I purposely trained every single morning, and my family just knew like this was what was going to have to happen. I missed vacations. I missed different things, but it was important to me to feel prepared for it. So I think that there's sometimes both routes you're going to go. I love that she did the net time, is what Tony Robbins called it. No extra time, add in extra. But for me, I did a lot of it by myself too. So,
well, I'm going to put you on the spot, but I've been at conferences with you where you were doing 75 hard and you were just, it's matter of fact, like we'd be having dinner and you're like, I got to go hit my second workout. When you commit to something, you're just kind of a machine in that you know what you need to do, you're going to do it. And I really admire the discipline and focus that you have, where you still did everything with us too, but you got up earlier, you ran later, you made changes to your diet or whatever to adhere to the rules. And you didn't complain about it. It was just like, I got to do this. I signed up to do it. And so I've seen that side of you, and I think it's really powerful.
Yeah, I generally just won't commit to something unless I'm like, I'm going to do it. And so that's why the mountain was so important to me. Like, I signed up, and I think I overly prepared, because I'm like, I am going to make this happen. Yeah. And even like the marathon, we're going to run the marathon together. I've honestly never ran. I have ran every day this week. So, I'm like, yeah, I did go run. My Oura ring keeps on being like, you need to rest. My rest score is like 40.
My Oura ring's like you're dying.
My Oura ring's like, something's wrong with you. I'm like, why am I not recovered yet? But I think it's because I'm like, now I got to figure out how to run this marathon. But
well, I always say, if you're a PhD at one thing, you're a kindergartner at the next. And so look at you, you've done this mountain 8 times, but you're telling us on this call how a marathon's intimidating because you haven't done one before. And so it's, again, an all new thing that you have to figure out, which is how you keep challenging yourself, which is great.
Yeah. Well, I want to say one thing though, because I think this is important if you're a woman in your 40s or maybe your 50s or whatever. I think a lot we get caught up in not trying new things. Like we get caught up in maybe like learning something new might be a challenge. And I think these events give you, like, it was an aha to me, like, man, I can probably learn anything I want if I just want to be purposeful around it. So I just would challenge you all, if there's something you want, go, regardless of endurance or an instrument or dancing or whatever, like, we're not too old to go learn something new. So.
I love that. It's never too late. Brian, you want to add anything?
The only thing I'd add, and I hope this comes out the right way. When we talk about sacrifice for this event, or what did you forego? I didn't sacrifice much or forego much. And I say that, and this is the part I'm like, I hope I word this correctly. By no means am I cool, like, or am I trying to downplay it? It becomes a lifestyle. And I know Spring, like, she gave you the answer around specific to this event, but it's also her lifestyle. And for Vija, it's become, or is becoming, the lifestyle. So for me, it wasn't so much sacrifice. I just traded different workouts or different food in replace of maybe specific things I was doing. I made the sacrifices quite a long time ago when I decided that my health was a certain priority, and I wasn't drinking and I was sleeping better. Like, I had to make a lot of sacrifices to get to the point. So for this specific event, there weren't sacrifices because they'd already been made, is what I'm trying to say. And it becomes a lifestyle, and you know, at some point maybe I'll take a break, and sure, I'm gonna have to reboot, and there's gonna be new sacrifices, but fortunately this kind of fell in line with something that's been going well for me for a little bit. So the point I'm trying to make, and how it relates to everything else in life, is if the foundation is already established, then the sacrifices or changes might be minimal. It's when the foundation is not there, or it fell off, when you have a big delta to make up for. And so that was my experience.
Yeah, you're re-engineering your whole life. But if it's weak, then it's more subtle, and it's a big part of the way you're programmed to begin with.
Right. So the takeaway for me has always been, like, the more consistent I can remain post-event. Like Vija said the other day, was it last night? Vija and I were talking, and she's like,
yeah,
I want to go do this and this and this. I'm like, whoa, chill out. Like, and she's like, but I want to take advantage of all of this endurance and muscle and motivation I've created. And she's right to think that way. In other words, whatever she does next, there won't be near the sacrifice because she already put in the work.
Yep. And she created a baseline.
Yeah.
Yep. Okay. Well, let's talk about the weekend. It was cold. It was wet. I was watching all of your stories. It was dreary. For some people, no amount of preparation may have prepared you for the conditions on that mountain. It was pretty brutal. talk to me about, like, it's easy to say now when we're through it, like, I didn't really want to quit, but I'm sure there are moments where you're like, why am I doing this? And I
That does
am
not mean I was not in massive pain.
well, I was gonna say, I step on a puddle with my shoes and I'm depressed for like the day because my feet are uncomfortable, and you guys were soaked to the bone. And so let's talk about the mountain and the physical and mental challenges that the games you had to play to succeed. I mean, start me off, paint the picture, and tell me some ugly too. I don't want to hear about how well we conquered it all. Tell me some ugly stuff that you had to face and how you got through it.
I mean, it was the hardest thing I've ever done in my life. It was brutal. I mean, I suppose on one end I wanted to quit all the time, but I guess what I was saying is that I actually didn't, even though I wanted the pain to go away. Maybe that's a better way to say it. I wanted the pain to go away. But, I did have a pain management plan and I practiced it. And every time the pain started coming in those really hard practice runs, I just started having, this is where I'm going to get weird. So everyone just get braced for the weird talk. But every time I started, I could feel the pain cave coming during my workouts. I would talk to it. I would say, "Oh, here you are. I've been waiting for you to come. That's interesting. It took till now to come. So we're coming a little later. Fascinating." And I would just talk to it, and I'd be hiking and I'd be like, what feeds you? What's going to make you stay? What's going to make you go? Because my mind is overriding you, and I will continue on. So how is this going to be easier for the two of us to get along with, and I would just talk to it. I just had conversations and an inner dialogue, and I continued that on the mountain. What I will say, and I'm curious to hear what Spring and Brian, it's funny, I never saw them once on the mountain because we were pacing pretty well together, meaning, you guys were here and I was here. We just were like doing this, that whole first day. But the second thing I would say is the community. I mean, I met Jeremy and Chris, who we ended up doing like 3 ascents together. We've already talked on the phone. They were incredible. And there were times where I pulled them up the mountain, like, come on, I force fed Jeremy once. I like literally was feeding him. And there were times where those guys were like almost pushing me up the mountain. Right. So I would just say that the community doing hard things together was monumental for me to get through that.
Did you expect it to be as brutal as it was then? Because you said you were prepared. I mean, you did expect the rain.
I expected it, but I don't think I could have imagined the level of hardness. Like I saw Spring's eyes. I do not think this was as hard for Spring as me. Like Spring, you're just so fit. I remember just looking at you going, dude, this is harder than anything I could ever imagine. Or like, yeah, but I could tell, that I think it was like, it was hard for me.
Well, and here's the thing,
Maybe you hide it better, Spring.
Day one, it was gorgeous. It was sunny. Via, you were like, this is going to be
hike one, not day one. Hike one.
The hike one. And then I remember Tony Figueroa's post when he's like, did I succeed? No, I expected the heavens and sunshine to smile upon me the whole time, and I just wasn't prepared for the conditions that we face. So, Brian, Spring, how did you manage the conditions?
So I'll go. So I think I have contrast, right? I've done so many of these, and I live in Utah and I train. It's hot. It's like 90 plus degrees. No, it's like, it's brutal a lot. When the 29 on 29 staff actually said to Brian and I, like, we believe Snow Basin is probably the hardest because it is so hot and brutal. So I actually like the rain. Also last year for me in Vermont, so I did all 5 last year, and Vermont was October. So it was already colder, and it rained like, no hyperbole, 5 times what it rained in Whistler. And that was so brutal. And I remember climbing, and I remember thinking to myself, man, I am so gritty. Like, I'm so proud of myself. I'm still out here because people like that success rate was like non-existent. And Colleen, the voice of the mountain's husband, was hiking that one, and he and I hiked, and he said, well, you know what Colleen says is there's no bad weather, there's just bad gear. And I was like, wow, it's kind of true. Like, if you're not prepared, like, it is what it is. So I think the key to this is A, you got to be prepared. B, I checked the weather before we went, and it showed rain the entire time. So I was overly prepared and packed. I had a ton of different shoes. Like, I had a plan. Like, my husband, I was fortunate enough to have a Sherpa, is what I call him, or Instagram husband. But he literally took my clothes if they were wet and washed and dried them so I wasn't soaking wet, and dried my shoes. Like, I was in a different situation. But I would say I actually really enjoyed the rain, and I don't love being wet, but there is a contrast, and I'd much rather be wet than dying of heat. So that's the way I looked at it. You might have something different, Brian, but you're from Arizona, so I would think you probably loved it too.
I did, for a different reason, though. I think I loved it just because I knew it would. Spring, I think we were similar in that we knew finishing this was not going to be what we were up against. It was finishing it in the manner in which we wanted to finish it.
Yeah.
And the rain created the environment or the difficulty we were probably, again, in a messed up way, seeking. For me, I really thought there's two things that come to mind as we're talking about this. And I should mention, I screwed up. What you just said around the gear, oh my gosh. Like, I really was terrible on my gear. I underestimated. I had rain gear, but I did not realize how sweaty I'd get in wearing rain gear. So while I wasn't getting wet from the outside, my clothes were getting wet from the inside. And there's nothing worse than sweat when it gets cold. And so I ran out of clothes. And because you want to change if you can, and you want to be dry, and that didn't work out well for me. That is something I need to fix next time. That being said, I think when you look at just a plan, business plan, life plan, relationship plan, you've got a goal and you have a deadline. Usually you have strategy, you have tactics. That's what typically comprises a plan. But I also think, like, the most successful plans have a fifth element to them, and it's adaptation, like the ability to adapt, like the flex. Like, hey, this strategy is what I had written out in a perfect scenario. These were the tactics that would work out in this ideal scenario. If the world changes, the environment changes, you've got to adapt. And I was thinking about that an awful lot going into this. Even though I underprepared with respect to gear, I did know something was going to happen. For me, what happened, aside from the rain, was that my heels are blistered, and it happened on the second ascent. And the blisters were not good. When you're hiking up, it's terrible. And they put duct tape on them at the recovery room, which actually, for anyone that wants, like, it worked awesome. Until like number 6 or 7, which I had to take them off. That was not good. But my point, though, in all of that was I knew there was going to be something I couldn't account for. I was just waiting for when it hit. I never thought it'd be my heels, and it happened. And so the plan for having to adapt was already on my mind. And the other thing, much like Vija was saying, like Vija talked about this voice or this debate she was having. I love that. For me, it's not so much that debate, but I do ask myself all of the time when I'm making any sort of decision, I will say, I'll ask myself, how are you going to feel about this decision tomorrow? Like, how, even like today in business, I will think about a decision that must be made, and I will take a step back and say, what am I going to think about this decision tomorrow at the same time? Am I going to be happy? Am I going to be sad? Probably the biggest motivator for me. Will I regret the decision I just made? And so on the mountain, the decisions I was making, I thought, okay, tomorrow when I'm all dry and warm and laying in this Fairmont hotel bed, am I going to be proud of the decision I made, or am I going to have regret? And a lot of times for me, that's what it takes to to do what I know is ultimately the better thing, although it may not feel the better thing in the very moment.
Can I add to that, Brian?
Please, of course.
So good. One of the lessons I learned from Jeremy Newsom, who I ended up doing almost 3 ascents with, who's an ultra runner. He said, Via, I always have 3 goals every race. I taught this to my team on Monday, by the way. So there's always the BHAG. And that's the the big, hairy, audacious goal. You hit it sometimes. It happens, right? The second one is what's success. And the third one is what is the standard I will not go below. So, and he looked at me, it was 11 a.m. and it was at the last food station, wasn't at the last table, but it was the third. It was at the third station. It was 11 a.m. He goes, Via, my standard I will not go to below as I will get up to the top at noon, which is in an hour. And he was sitting, he was bonked. And so I said, we're going to do this, Jeremy. And I started feeding him. And I was like, get up. I'm pacing you right now. And then Chris was there and we paced Jeremy. It's 11:55. He got up, right? And I shared that with my team. And I said, here's the thing. You guys all go to these trainers and everyone's rah. And they said, write down your goal, double it. And you all get excited and swept away. And then you get punched in the face and you throw it all away. Instead, we really do need 3 plans for everything. We need that. You're going to hit your BHAG some years. You're going to hit it some years. Many years, you're going to hit success. A lot of years, you just have to simply set a standard you will not go below. And you need to there needs to be nothing stopping you from doing that. So just like us, you wanted to go all night. That was your standard. You wouldn't go below, Brian. Like for me, it was just finishing spring. I'm not sure, but whatever it is, that was non-negotiable. That third level, right? And I was telling my agents that. I said, look, it's not always going to be the BHAG, but do not throw it all away and give it up just because you're not at that level 1. Like we have plan Bs and Cs. We adapt, to your point. That's what made me think about it, Brian. And we just have standards we will not go below. So if the BHAG's 24 sales a year, success is 18, in the standards 12, then you have 4 months this year to hit that 12, kind of hell or high water, right? So that was one of my biggest lessons. It is not all or nothing. That's not what this is. To Brian's point, this is about adapting, and this is about, being in tune with the situation and being aware, I made a mistake that I'm going to adapt for. I didn't bring enough gear, or I didn't prepare or qualify. That was a huge lesson for me.
I love it. We have a couple of people on this call that I want to shout out, and if I can promote them to panelists. The 3 of you did make it up the mountain all 8 times. I would love to hear from a couple of people. I've got Nicole Canoli and Meg Pinella, if they're still on the call. Love to hear their story briefly on not knowing at some point you weren't going to hit 8 and what kept you going. Let me see, Matt, if you can promote Nicole or Meg to panelists and just get them to introduce themselves and hear their story briefly. And while we're doing that, please pop into chat, either in the Q&A mode or just to everyone, any other questions that we want to make sure we get answered before we end our time. Nicole, welcome. How you doing?
Hey, I'm great. Nice to see you guys again. These beautiful faces who lapped me multiple times on the mountain.
Well, I know we don't have a lot of time, but I'd love to kind of hear your story. I was following you on Instagram, and I know you were pretty spent that first day, pretty ready to give up. Talk to us where you were and then what happened the next day and kind of how you finished it.
Totally. So this is actually my second 29.029. I did Whistler 2 years ago and I did not finish, but I also didn't train for it because my friend was like, oh, you can do this. It's no problem. You're fit enough. And I was like, okay. So I got out there. I was not fit enough and I could not do it. So I'd been training for the last 250 days. I knew physically I was ready for it. There was absolutely no question in my mind that I was going to be able to finish this thing. And the first ascent was glorious. I did it under 3 hours. I was like, I'm pacing great. I'm going to be fine. And then the second ascent happened and it started to rain. And I started kind of getting in my head and I was like, this is bizarre. And then I ended up hooking up with a wonderful woman that we ended up doing the next two ascents together, but she paced slower than me. And I was just like, okay, come on. But however, she was making me eat. She was making me eat every 30 minutes, but it was only just a little bit. And so what kind of started happening then is because I also started taking a semaglutide 30 days ago. And the more that I would eat, the more sick I would get. And so I ended up throwing up. I ended up getting in my head really bad. The rain started to come. And so I had this mental shift of like, I can do this to what the hell am I doing? And wanted to throw everything away. And so after the third ascent actually took me 4.5 hours. And so by the time that I got to the third gondola ride, I had a full mental breakdown in the gondola and I just lost it. I called my Sherpa and I was like, you need to meet me right now. I cannot do this anymore. I have got to go inside. And I lost it. And I got down to the ascent board and Colleen, the voice of the mountain, saw me and she just saw me and we actually know each other. And so she's just like, oh my God, you need to go inside and like get yourself together and then come back out whenever you're ready. But what I didn't expect is whenever I got in there, I was full on bonked. No, like it was like I had left my body and I had never met that person before because I don't get that kind of emotional. And so I sat under my shower and I just cried for 3 hours. And I was like, I will never do this again. I don't know why the hell I'm going to pay $7,000 to do this. This is insane. And I have a bunch of my friends who are following along and they're texting me and they're calling. They're like, what's going on? I was like, I don't want to talk to anybody. And it was actually Ben who he texted me and he's like, I'm proud of you no matter what, but what's your next game plan? What are you going to do? And I was like, well, I don't know. I'll figure this out tomorrow. But in my head, I was like, I am done.
You were done.
So I was done. I was put a fork in me. I was like literally ready to set fire to everything and just leave. I considered getting a flight and going home because I did not want to face myself. I did not know who that person was. She was insane. And then the next morning, Vija texted me. Well, actually, I think she texted me whenever she got off the mountain at 3 o'clock in the morning. She was like, hey, just checking on you. And I was like, not doing well. I don't think I'm going to get back on the mountain. Here's where I am. And then she sent me this really beautiful message about I don't care if you finish this thing, but I care if you quit and you need to get your ass back on the mountain because I know you. And I was like, ugh. So I got up and I just started pacing around my room and I grabbed one sock. And I put one sock on and then I just kept pacing and was like, I'm not fucking doing this. Sorry. I was like, I'm not doing this. And then I kept looking at my phone. I was like, but she's right. I can do this. And then my roommate, she was coming back in to change for her final ascent. And she's like, you can do this. She's like, no matter what, I think you're amazing. But I don't think you're going to be proud of yourself if you don't quit. And I was like, all right, whatever. And so I kept pacing and I put one sock on. It took me literally an hour and a half to get myself out of the room, by the way, because it was just one sock. It was one pants. It was another sock. It was, it was all that stuff. And so finally it was just like, whatever. And I went outside and I was like, as the crazy is happening in my head, I was just like, shut up, shut up, shut up. And I just walked outside and then I saw Colleen. I was like, hey, and she's like, oh my gosh, you're back. And she just came up and gave me this huge hug. She's like, you got this. Great job for not quitting. I'm so proud of you. I was like, all right, whatever. And so, I kept on waddling up the mountain. It took me 5.5 hours, by the way, that ascent. It was the longest that it had ever taken me. And I was miserable. I sat down, I sat down at every aid station. I would just sit there for 30 minutes and I'd cry. I'm like, what am I doing? This is miserable. And it wasn't until aid station, I think it was between aid station 2 and 3, I saw Vija. And as soon as Vija got on the mountain, I was just like, I don't know if you saw me, Vija, but I just lost it. I just started sobbing. And I was just like, oh my God, your message got me on. Yeah, well, she did. And so I started talking to Vija about what was going on physically. And she said, she's like, you bombed. That's all this is your nutrition. That's the problem. And she started force feeding me. And sure enough, she was right because she was force feeding me, but she was feeding me good stuff. She wasn't feeding me crap because that's the other thing. I eat a pretty healthy diet. I don't eat refined sugars. So it's this weird stuff that's going on in the background, but she started feeding me this goo stuff that was actually really good. And about 45 minutes later, it was I'd become bright-eyed and bushy-tailed. And then next thing you know, I'm going up the mountain. And so after that, when I finished and I went back to my room, and in fact, at this point, I saw Meg on the mountain too, and we kind of had a little bit of conversation, and she was really sweet because she texted me the next day. and was like, hey, I'm going to go back up. If you already want, I was like, I'm actually at aid station 3 already. Like, it's taken me a long time to get here, but I'm here. And so I went back down and I thought I was just going to be done. And I was like, whatever, I got back on the mountain didn't beat me. I went back up for one ascent. If I'm going to take 5.5 hours, I've only got 4 hours left in this journey until 6 o'clock. I'm not going to make it back up. And so I go and I'm like, I trail off and I go back to my room and I sit down. At this point, my roommate had finished she had just finished. And she's like, I'm so proud of you for getting back up, but I think you have one more in you. And then my best friend Grace called, and Grace just like literally started yelling at me, what are you doing? You're not this person. And like just
words.
Like anybody who knows Grace, we call her Tiger Mom. Like, she's completely insane. And she was just like, I'm not taking no for an excuse. Get your ass back on the mountain. You're not this person. She's like, you can get 2 more. And I was like, Grace, we've only got 4 hours left. She's like, I don't care. I know you. And I was like, okay. So it was after
So
that,
what did you
like,
finish? Yeah. How many did you end up doing?
I ended up finishing 5 because my Sherpa ended up saying, he's like, I'll pace you up the mountain. He's like, I'm going to go with you. He's like, come on, we got this. And it was actually my fastest lap time. We finished it in 2 hours and like 35 minutes for my final lap, which, yeah, that was that.
So the night before, the first night, you were done with 3 and you were done.
Done. I was going home. Yeah.
That's it. And
Yeah.
because people cared and didn't let you quit, and after your meltdown, you were like a phoenix rising, right? You literally found a different version of you that gave you the strength. It's an amazing story, Nicole. Thank you for sharing it. I know we have just a few minutes left, but I wanted everyone to hear that this mountain means different things to different people at different times of whatever they're facing. And so I'd like to kind of end this conversation with the parallels of this kind of mountain challenge to your life. Like, how do you apply? With the Misogi, I know, like, once you do big things, all the other things seem easier because you've pushed yourself so much. But I'd love to kind of hear from you guys all on what are the lessons? How do you apply this in your life? And what advice would you have for people who weren't on that mountain, are either thinking about doing it or want to do something like this so that they can find what they're made of? Who wants to go first?
Go ahead, Vija.
Well, 2 things. I was just thinking about. The first one is that, doing things like this help you build trust in yourself, because number one, you're keeping promises to yourself. And then you're stretching yourself, and then when you achieve them, you get confidence. Brian and I talked about that earlier, and then that builds on itself, and so it translates very easily to things I've done all week, making that call I maybe would have put off before, and just being much more aggressive and confident in myself and my abilities. So it translates in a lot of different ways, but my big lesson that's really my life in progress, this is really what I need to embrace in my life. And again, Brian and Spring both alluded to it, is the concept that I posted on Sarita. Actually, it's funny, all of you here have to do with this, and which is the training is the marathon, right? And the race is the celebration, is that concept. And every day I basically have dialogues with myself that it's my activities and the processes and the things that I do every day that is moving the needle in my business, moving the needle in my health, getting me closer to any goal I have. The actual goal itself is really secondary. In fact, the reason we set goals is to become the person that is required to hit those goals. And so to me, the ultimate lesson is that, I want to get to a place like Brian and Spring where it's so woven into my life that it really doesn't disrupt it. Where, there's a cadence and a norm around my family and my lifestyle that training for 29029 or Kilimanjaro or Mount Fuji or Mont Blanc or whatever I want to do next doesn't even disrupt it, because that's who I am and the whole things around it. So the training is the marathon, the race is the event, has really become probably one of my primary mantras for life. And I think that this was a tangible way for me to experience that.
And Via, would you do it again?
Yeah. Oh, we're doing it again. We're going to do, if anyone's interested, tremblant. How do we say that? What do we think?
Mount Tremblant.
Mount Tremblant.
That'd be cool. That'd be really
You
cool.
guys are crazy, basically.
Crazy.
You're gonna
Brian-
do it, Sarita. You're
We're
up
going to do it,
next.
Sarita. It's in your
Great
future. You're just-
elevation, but I have a feeling I'm going to get bullied into it.
You're
for
avoiding
sure.
the inevitable. You're doing it. So yeah.
Spring parting words, lessons, advice.
I think the mountain is parallel to life and pretty much everything. The training, Brian and I were actually talking about this on the mountain of the preparation going into making it happen. I'll correlate it back to our teams. How much time we prep for this, and yet we don't expect to prep for a listing appointment or scripting or whatever. And it's just so crazy to think about, like, if there's anything you want in life, you're going to have to prepare. You can't just show up. And so that's a really big one. The other thing I would also say, like a mountain, like we didn't climb straight up. We would climb and then there would be a plateau and then we'd climb, we'd be a plateau. And I think life in general, like you're on a climb and then there's going to be a time that things level out or go down a little bit. And then it's your job to get climbing back up. And it's not always unicorns and rainbows. It's what you make of it. And having that final destination of, you know, where you're going, and to what Brian said, being flexible. And the last thing I'll say is normally Jesse Itzler's there speaking. I think he told me last year, like Whistler's far because he's from in Atlanta and whatnot. But he always says in his speech, and I agree with him, he's like, once you prove to yourself you can do this, it just lights a fire that you've done something hard. And he's like, go and double your business. Go and double your business plan because you've proved to yourself that you have the grit to go make it happen. So if there's something that you want to go make happen, I would just challenge you, go pick something hard and prove to yourself that you can do it in whatever capacity. Because once you get that self-confidence and that belief, it feeds into everything else in your life. So those are my parting words.
That's gold. I love that. Brian, how about you?
Yeah, I think for this particular event, I had fewer lessons and more reminders. Like fewer lessons in that I didn't learn something I didn't already know, but reminders in that I realized a lot of things I had forgotten. Things that come to mind. There were a time or two or three, even when I was with Spring, where we'd get behind a group who was moving at a slower pace than us. And there was time when they're like, come on by. And we're like, no, you're good. And it was interesting, like slowing down and collecting ourselves and lowering our heart rate actually paid dividends down the road. Meaning that every once in a while, slowing down is not a terrible thing to kind of regain your composure, lower your heart rate, and collect yourself. I also think about, in terms of reminders, you're never going to be 100% prepared. I mentioned the blisters. Didn't see that one coming. So no matter how much you prep, there's always going to be something that comes out of left field. And I'll tell you, since we're talking blisters, the trainer there, the person working on me, I remember asking, like, should I deal with this now or should I just, gut it out until it's absolutely necessary? And she said, no, you always take care of the problem as soon as you see it while it's small, as opposed to letting it become bigger and dealing with it then. It never works out. And it's funny how my heels and my blisters are so similar to things in life and business. Another reminder, sometimes all you need to do, Nicole, you might like this one. Sometimes all you need to do is eat a meal, have a snack. It's amazing what food in your stomach will do to your mood, attitude, and energy. When you're grouchy, you may just be hungry.
Yeah, hangry is a thing. It really is.
100%. I think the very last thing, it kind of goes with slowing down. Sometimes maybe you just need a 30-minute break. Like Spring is a master of this, by the way. How many times did you swing by your room, Spring, and like reset? Seriously.
Well, true. I only did once, but yes, it was great. I actually took a shower
Yeah,
It was great. It was great.
and it was brilliant because she was so much happier than me the next round, but we were still on the same pace. She's actually faster than me. Like we're just like, and so sometimes like you want to gut it out, but maybe a 30-minute like break pays off. And so how do you equate that to business and life?
Slow down to speed up.
Maybe it's not always go, 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 go. Maybe it's kind of cool to take a break, recalibrate, take a shower, eat a snack, and then get going.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I will tell you and I'm so proud that you guys you did this and you're my friends and I've learned so much just watching you. You guys do make it look easy and you minimize sometimes, some really, it was a big deal. And it was really, there was so much that we learned just from being there with you because you guys took us with you. And so the lessons you're giving us, the advice, whether it's a mountain or whether it's your own personal mountain, getting fit, spending more time with your family, having a business goal, doing something you've never done, picking up a skill that you've never done. All of it requires a game plan, but the thing that you guys have also emphasized to me is just the power of community and the people that are doing this with you. Brian, I was going to ask you, I mean, you were kind of ahead. I mean, it sounded like you were going fairly fast, but the fact that you found people like Spring to be with and pace with, like no matter what level you're at, you find your people that keep pushing you and keep making you better. And so it's just been great just hearing even the way you guys talk with all the people that in our community that encouraged you at different times. The fact that Nicole got a message from Vija and that sort of was one of the people that kind of got her into a different frame of mind the next day. It's just really powerful to witness. So thank you so much for being here. I think we could go on all day. This was one of my favorite Power Playbooks. We are going to have a bye week and the next one on September 11th, and we're going to pick back up on September 25th. Stay tuned for the topic and for more information. And thank you so much to our esteemed guests for sharing today. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you, Sarita.
Bye.
Have a good one.